There are three main approaches to environmentalism in the Western world: the technological, the cognitive, and the behavioural. Are they working? No, they're not. Not really. Okay, well, at a local level, we have had some wins. Environmentalism has worked. But at an international scale, on nearly every global environmental issue, we're struggling. Things tend to be getting worse, not better. The climate stripes don't lie. I turn 45 next week. I've been an environmentalist for a quarter of a century now, more than half my life. I've got the grey hairs, and these are my climate stripes. I'm worried. Now, I'm not saying that I'm the expert on all this. There's people who've been environmentalism for a lot longer than I have. But I can, I think, say a few things about what I think's happening and what's going wrong. I'll start with the three main approaches to environmentalism: the technological, the cognitive, and the behavioural. Dominant at the moment is the technological approach. We're told that things like carbon capture and storage, solar radiation management, sustainable aviation fuel, huge-scale solar and wind farms, big massive flood defences and seawalls, we're told that these things are going to come along and bail us out of the crisis, or at the very least kind of protect us from the worst of it. Now, we do need to invest in all these things, and they are slowing the rate at which the planet is warming up. But we need to be very, very wary of those who will have us believe that we can technology our way out of this predicament. We can't. These things aren't going to come online fast enough and at a grand enough scale to prevent the planet from warming by 2 degrees. In other words, to prevent it from seriously overheating. Next up, we have the cognitive approach. Essentially, this is the transfer of knowledge from experts, fire educators, to ordinary people, under the kind of theory of change that if people understand a bit more about this, then they'll act rationally and be more environmental. Now, of course, we do need to educate young people and adults about what's going on, and we're being woefully let down on this at the moment. There's nowhere near enough is being taught, and what is being taught is quite often a sugar-coated version of the truth. And it's often kind of served up with a side salad of these reassuring stories about technological saviours. The reason that it's not quite working is something which I reflect on. I know lots about climate change myself, and yet my ecological footprint is still way too high. Why is this? Well, it's because even though I know about environmental issues and I care about them and they do guide the way I live my life, I care about other things too. So I care about my family, my friends, my job, and then I also care about things like adventure and travel and sport and music and art and fashion, sort of. And these things are important to me because I'm a human being and I need to kind of invest in them to feel human in the 21st century. I also need to eat, and I also need to heat my home, and I need to get places on time, and it's not often easy to do those things in an environmental way. So there's a disconnect going on. We call it the knowledge action gap. So what I know I should be doing for the sake of the planet and what I'm actually doing are not necessarily the same thing. And I'm not the only one who suffers from this knowledge action gap. Many of you will be experiencing this too, and it's kind of why the cognitive approach has a limited effect. And finally, we have the behavioural approach. So we know we can nudge people into better environmental behaviours using sort of comedy and bribes and gimmicks to get them to put their cigarette butts in a bin. But the effects quite often don't last, and so they sort of wear off, the novelty wears off. We can't keep infantilising people into better environmental behaviours. And then we have the government levers. So this is things like taxes, rules and regulations, which discourage people from bad environmental behaviours. And then the kind of tax breaks and other incentives, which encourage people into good environmental behaviours. But again, this has a limited effect, because political will and motivation for strong environmental policy ebbs and flows. And at the moment, it's ebbing a fair bit. Now, I've not kind of trash-talked the environmental movement for the hell of it. I'm not saying that these approaches are bad per se or done with bad intentions, but some of it is quite badly done and some of it is done with bad intentions. I've been in the room when the greenwash is being applied, but no, I'm not saying that these approaches are wrong. What I'm interested in is why they continue to dominate, even though we know they're not having the desired effect, not even when done in combination. They're just not sufficient. To quote the late great comedian Sean Locke, we're turning up to an earthquake with a dustpan and brush. We need an additional approach, something which is stronger and more powerful. The roots of the crisis are deep. Climate change is a symptom of a much bigger and much hairier set of problems. And at heart those problems is one which we've let grow and kind of shied away from for too long. And if we continue to let it grow, it will completely destroy our ability to come together, and we will need to come together to create the fundamental changes to how society functions that even a body as conservative as the IPCC are now saying is necessary. That heart of the matter problem is individualism, but not what it was, what it has become. This is a map of countries coded according to how individualistic they are. Those in red and pink have high levels of individualism, and those in green and blue have comparatively lower levels of individualism. It's taken from a piece of work by Hikaru Komatsu and colleagues, who were looking into whether there was a link between ecological footprint and individualism. And turns out, there's no great shock here, there is. The more individualistic a country is, the higher its ecological footprint is likely to be. So individualism. Well, it started as a wonderful thing. When it began to take root in the 1950s, people in the USA first and then spread around the Western world were freeing themselves from the shackles of governments and institutions and all kinds of social and cultural norms that were preventing them from fully expressing themselves. It was enabled by governments, and they were guided by economists and psychologists, and for many people it was a wonderfully liberating time. Millions of people started to dress differently, live differently, have different kinds of relationships, find different ways of getting intoxicated on a Saturday night. And while this was going on, something else bigger was happening too. Culture was exploding. So musicians, artists, designers, architects, writers, filmmakers, they were all innovating, experimenting at a tremendous pace. This is why the 1960s look so different to the 1950s, why the 70s look different to the 60s, why the 80s look different again, as did the 1990s. People were getting excited about the future, and they weren't just imagining what it might be like, they were coming together to create it in real time. So change happened, and progress happened. And this was not for all people, but for many people, it improved their lives. Their lives became more rewarding, more varied, more spontaneous, and just a bit more delightful. But individualism evolved, as did politics. And over the next quarter century, aided by technological shifts, the internet being absolutely key, individualism became hyperindividualism. And hyperindividualism, for a lot of people, isn't quite so thrilling. In fact, it can feel quite lonely, maybe a bit desolate. Around the turn of the century, the rates of progressive change began to slow right down. The first quarter of this century has been nowhere near as creative as the half century that came before it. The difference culturally between now, 2025, and 20 years ago, 2005, is nowhere near as big as the differences witnessed between, say, 1985 and 1965. What's new now is actually quite often not all that new at all. It's kind of a rehash of what's gone before. Teenagers today are wearing the same clothes as I was wearing when I was a teenager in the 1990s. And they're spending the money on the same thing I was spending my money on, tickets to go and see Blur and Oasis. And this lack of progress has often been called the slow cancellation of the future. And this relentless reviving and rehashing of what's gone before is dubbed retromania. And it's rife in the cultural domain, but it extends into environmentalism too. That's why we keep relying on those same three approaches, the technological, the cognitive, and the behavioural. And we keep doing the same things over and over again within those three domains, even though we know that they're not really working. So why is this? Why have we become stuck? Well, this is what happens in hyper-individualistic societies. They kind of run out of ideas. What it is a crisis of imagination. And I think it's due to two key kind of deficits that we have right now. When human beings bounce thoughts and insights off each other, and when they daydream, we human beings, we're ideas machines. But because of hyper-individualism, we're doing less and less of both of these things. Having entertainment at our fingertips 24/7 doesn't help, because it means we just don't get bored anymore. If we don't get bored anymore, we don't need to daydream. And we don't need to hang out with our friends or go to the pub or join a club to escape the mundanity of our daily existence. We can just click on a device, be entertained by somebody else's probably rehashed ideas, and not stop to come up with any ideas of our own. In the hyper-individualised society we live in, we're just not stopping to ponder those what-if questions. And we're spending even less time pondering the What if we did it like this? Questions. And if we're not pondering these questions, then we're not even going to be able to imagine alternative futures, let alone create them in real time. But there's a bigger problem with hyperindividualism, and that is that it inhibits us from coming together. When individualism started, it was a wonderful thing. But part of what made it wonderful is that it coexisted with collaboration and community. The yin had a yang. What we have with hyperindividualism is a yin without a yang. It's painful, it makes us fragile, and it makes us impotent. If we're a society of hyper-individualized beings who are strongly independent selves, then we're a fragmented society. And a fragmented society is not really a society at all. It doesn't band together to create the new or to overthrow oppressive systems. It's also incredibly vulnerable to attack and shock. Have we ever been more susceptible to those who want to divide, conquer, and control? However, and it's a huge however, something's starting to emerge, I think, which is a bit of a remedy to all this. If we can get it right and do enough of it, its effect will be less dustpan and brush and more bulldozer. Individualism isn't going to go away, but if we can rein in the hyper version of it, we might just be able to free ourselves enough to be able to generally come up with new ideas again. But more importantly, if we can tame that hyper, we stand a better chance of connecting again to each other and to the planet, and making those connections deep enough that they develop within us the kinship which underpins the kind of collective struggle that we need. What's emerging is a movement for interdependence. Through it, we're rediscovering ourselves as connected or interconnected beings, connected to each other, connected to other species, and connected to the Earth itself. This makes us feel less separate and more entangled. And while that's going on, we're letting go of the independent self as an idea to live by, and we're embracing the interdependent self. Now, this isn't easy to do because we live in an economy which grows by splitting us off from one another, but it is starting to happen. Helping people and communities to feel their interdependence is the fourth and additional approach to environmentalism that we need. In truth, it's always been there, but kind of in the margins. What's happening now is it's starting to gain some momentum, hopefully enough momentum that it can go mainstream. And critical to this momentum is that it overlaps and intersects with what's going on in the societal realm. So things like citizens, not consumers, and the do with, not do to movement. It's an approach that bands us together and teaches us to think systemically, critically, but then it also helps us to deliberate and agonize and daydream. And if we can do enough of that, we might be able to start imagining alternative futures, and more importantly, become the collective force that we need to create those fundamental changes to how society functions that are now so desperately needed. So, how to finish? Well, with one of my heroes, the economist Julia Steinberger. She popped up with this a couple of weeks ago, and who needs AI when Steinberger can kind of summarise your tweet in your TED talk in one tweet? What she's saying here is what environmentalists really need to take heed of, and quickly, if we want to stop failing and start working. We have to learn again what humans are really good at, coming together to discuss, decide and act. That is the work. It's deep, it's educational, it's transformative, and it's starting, I think, to happen. Hyper-individualism isn't solely to blame for the mess we're in, but it is, I think, having a very detrimental effect on our ability not just to tackle the environmental crisis, but to live with it. It's a triple threat. Hyper-individualistic societies have the highest ecological footprints, they run out of ideas, and they're fragmented. And it's for these three reasons that we need to take them on. That's what the Movement for Interdependence is doing. Please join it. Thank you.